record now. Well, welcome everybody to Gemquest in November 2025. We are very proud to welcome Justin K. Prim. For those who do not know him, he's in the gem cutting business since 2012, if I read this correctly. And he's, well, the mastermind behind all of the history of gemology and gem cutting talks that you might hear and find throughout the internet. And he's very active in traveling, going to all the locations where you can find the cutters, specialized on a couple of gemstones as well. And I'm very glad that we have you here this time and that you will present us something on emeralds. So,
Yes,
Justin, the floor is yours.
thank you. So yeah, usually I am talking about cutting for about, I don't know, 5 years or something. I've been talking about cutting, and I just thought I should start to talk about something else sometimes. And emerald is my favorite stone, so tonight I will talk to you guys about emeralds, their history, sources, and a little bit about the art of gem cutting. So I'm Justin Prim. I'm originally from Chicago, but I'm coming to you live from Lyon, France, where I've been for the last couple of years. As Clemens said, I've been traveling all over the world, meeting gem cutters and documenting gem cutters and learning the different techniques of the various gem cutters as well as gemology, and sort of putting all that knowledge together that we've been accumulating into some of our books, into talks like this. So tonight we're going to be delving into the world of emeralds. So here's our roadmap for the evening. I want to just introduce you to the family of beryls and what is the emerald and what is the emerald through history. We're going to look at the emerald itself, go on a journey from mine to the cut stone. We're going to look at some of the historical uses of emerald and how people have mined it and used it in different ways. I do want to talk about the cutting because it's my absolute favorite subject, so I hope you will indulge me as we talk a little bit about the evolution of cutting from thousands of years ago until days ago. And then finally, I'll just close out with a couple of small, I guess, little stories about some of the most well-known emerald cutters of the world and just close it out like that. So this is our journey for the evening. So, the emerald. It has captivated the human imagination for thousands of years as time has gone on, as mining has gone on, as cutting has gone on. The humans have been loving and appreciating and adorning themselves with emeralds in so many different ways and so many different forms. And as we're going to find out from so many different localities, and so today I just want to take us on a little beautiful, enjoyable adventure through the story of emeralds so that we can love the emerald together. So let's start at the beginning. What is the emerald? If you don't know, I'm sorry for you, but the emerald is one of the stones in the beryl family. So even though the emerald is probably the most famous stone in this family, there's actually a lot of other stones in the family, all different colors, the blue aquamarine, the yellow heliodor, the pink morganite, the white goshenite, and the most rare of all the beryls is the red bixbyite. So emerald is probably the most well known, and it's probably one of the most expensive of this family that you could commonly find. And as we're about to see, emeralds have been used for really for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks connected emerald with Hermes. Uh, they considered it to be the stone of truth. The ancient Romans connected emeralds to Venus, the goddess of love, and associated it with wild growth and spring, which is pretty much the opposite of where we're at today with this fall to winter weather. The medieval Europeans had so many different ideas about emeralds, but one of the things that I've often read is that they believed that emeralds could blind serpents and it could also cure the sick. And there was one medieval European, Albertus Magnus, a monk, who thought that emeralds could improve the memory, calm restless spirits, and shatter if exposed to unbridled passion. So many different ways to look at the emerald, to see the emerald. Um, the emerald's been being used for all this time. Why is it so beloved? Why do people love the emerald so much? I think if we were to just take a poll, we would all agree it's really about the color. There's not that many green stones that we can find, and of all the green stones that we can find today, emerald is one of the few that's actually pleochroic. So the cool thing about emerald, and really about all pleochroic stones, that means we've got two different colors inside of the stone. So one direction is running across one axis, and where's my mouse here? I don't know if it will show up on the PowerPoint. Anyway, and then one can run along the other axis. So in the picture, you can kind of see both axes here. If you look in the bottom left of the emerald, you can see the more blue-green axis. And then if you look on the right, you can kind of get a hint of the more yellow-green axis. So these are the two axes that the cutter has to deal with when looking at the rough. And these are the two colors that are going to blend together to create the face-up color that we see when we look at a cut stone. So these hues can range anywhere from yellow to green to blue to green. And one of the cool things about the color green, and this is maybe why the medieval Europeans thought that this was such a soothing color to the eye, our eyes are very, very sensitive around 550 nanometer color spectrum. So we can see more green really than any other color. So our eyes are extremely sensitive to notice the subtle shifts of color, which is why we might prize one emerald over another by having just that specific shade of mixtures of green that we like more than others, maybe. So let's talk about, now that we know a little bit about what the emerald is, let's talk about the journey of the emerald and how it comes to us and what happens along the way. So probably almost all emeralds are going to go along this process. Of course, all emeralds are mined, so the emeralds have to come out of the ground in one way or the other. Most of the time, the emeralds are going to go through a treatment process where they get oiled to help hide the flaws or sometimes even help solidify the stone if it's a resin treatment. And then pretty much all stones that we would be wearing in jewelry have been cut. So most of the world's emeralds go through all of these stages before they get to the final customer. So I won't spend much time talking about mining, but I will spend a little bit of time talking about treatments because it's kind of an interesting and unique aspect to the emerald that's different than a lot of other stones. So because the emerald, unlike many stones, is very included even in the final product, emerald is probably the most accepted included stone that we have in the world of jewelry. So because of that, some of the things that we see being done to emeralds is this treatment. So fracture filling. So fracture filling could mean an oil vacuuming system. It can mean it could mean resin impregnation. It could mean different types of oil. And so from the gemological point of view, we can see in this first image some of the evidence of oiling. So if you send your stone into the gemological lab to get tested, or maybe you're the one doing that testing, one of the things that we know to look for is this rainbow sheen inside of the stone. This is giving us a sense that the stone has oil inside of it. We're seeing the oil kind of refract off the light and giving us some evidence that this stone has been tampered with. And then when we're looking at the before and after, notice in the center photo, especially that line right across the center, how sharp the crack looks. It's very noticeable. But then when we oil the stone, notice how the line looks a little bit more blurred. And this is a microscopic photo. So if we could zoom out and see the stone in actual size, essentially what it comes down to is you really don't see any or little of the inclusions that are inside, essentially making the inclusions invisible, which makes the stone more desirable. But this comes with a consequence, which is the reduction of value or the potential value. So here's an example that we can try to use to get a sense of how oiling affects a stone. And we have to keep in mind that The reason why we're oiling the stones is because the inclusions are extremely noticeable. They're somewhat of an eyesore. So if you can get away with not oiling a stone and having it still be a clean, beautiful, vivid stone that doesn't have this distracting element, of course the value can go up. So in this example, we're talking about a 3 carat emerald, and the way that oiling works, the way that the labs will do the reports, they're going to say it's a minor treatment, it's a moderate treatment, or a significant treatment, and that's depending on, all the labs have their own terminology. But if we have this 3 carat emerald and we can get it to look like this pretty clean image that we're seeing in the photo, if we can get it to look like that with only a minor treatment, so that just means a little bit or almost no oil inside, this can be anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000 per carat times three for a 3 carat emerald. But if we have to do a moderate oiling treatment in order to get this level of clarity for this stone, it's going to reduce the price down to 8 to 12,000 per carat. And if the lab report comes back and says this has a significant treatment, these are really considered to be less desirable. This could be as low as $4,000 a carat or even less. So we can see that the level of oiling severely reduces the price, the value of the emerald. However, we have to take that into consideration that without the oiling, some stones just couldn't be sold because they are just so included that, they're just not desirable because of how many inclusions they have inside. Now, once usually the treatment can be done either in the preforming stage or after the stone's been cut. It really just depends on that stone's journey. But once we get to the cutting phase, then it's up to the cutter to start to look at the stone and really try to consider all these different elements. But first and foremost is color. So we know, or hopefully we know, that the primary value attribute for a colored stone is the color. So when we're looking at the rough stone and we're looking at the shape of the emerald, most likely it probably looks something like this. Most of the emeralds that I've ever seen in the rough are still in a very well-formed barrel shape. So we can see the 6 sides, we can see the termination. Usually one side's broken, like the part that broke off of the growth area. And so we have to make this decision depending on the length and width of the stone about where to put the table. And the big question here is which color do we emphasize? So, as we already said, the emerald is pleochroic. It has two different color axes, and these color axes are more or less desirable depending on, the locality and what color they're at. So, we have the option of choosing where do we put the face, where do we put the table, and that's going to affect what's our primary color and what's our secondary color inside of the stone. So here we can see the same stone rotated in two different ways. So on our A axis, we've got more of like a blue-green, slightly mintier green color. And then down the C axis, we've got more of a yellow-green, grassy green color. And we've got to know before we can decide where to put the face, because in this stone, it's probably, as far as weight and retention goes, we could probably choose equally between both of these axes. So would we rather have a more blue-green or would we have a more yellow-green? Now, in the case of a longer crystal, like this is kind of a squarish or blocky crystal. In the case of a longer crystal, we probably wouldn't have the option of choosing the C-axis because we'd be losing so much of the stone's weight in order to choose that color. It wouldn't ever make sense. Luckily, for almost all localities, the A-axis color is the most desirable color, and it's the case in this picture too. So if you cut on the A-axis and you make the table facing into the A-axis, your primary color is going to be slightly bluer. Your C-axis is more yellow, and we can then use the cutting pattern to actually decide how much of the yellow we want to bring into into the blue in order to make our final hue of green, which is going to be a blending of both of those two. So the most sought after color is green with a hint of lemony yellow. So if it has a little bit of blue, that's okay. But if there's too much yellow, or if there's even sometimes there's almost a hint of brown in that yellow, that would be less desirable. So the cutter is really trying to think about where to put the face, where to put the table, and then how steep are the pavilion angles going to be on the end of the stone, which is going to decide how much of the end color or in the case of this image, how much of the C axis is going to come in and blend with the A axis. So if somebody has never cut an emerald before, it could be very intimidating and it should be taken with a lot of caution because, of course, emeralds are typically a pretty expensive stone. So, if you are just blindly cutting the stone as if it doesn't matter where you put the table, you could make a financially devastating mistake and lose a lot of the stone's value by choosing one axis over the other, or maybe even choosing the wrong pavilion angles that might bring in too much or too little of the secondary color, which might hurt the value of that stone. So, because emeralds are so expensive, it's really one of the most expensive colored stones that we work with. It's really, really important that we maintain as much weight as possible. So, as the cutter, we're constantly fighting basically the demands of our customer to keep a big stone while also maximizing color and maximizing reflection. So, these are always the two biggest compromises when we talk about cutting. It's like, do you get more yield and make an uglier stone, or do you try to improve the color and lose a little bit more weight? Now, in my experience, our customers almost always want yield because the color value of the stone is so high that they would rather just have a bigger stone. Similar to the case of rubies. Rubies are almost always cut for weight as well because the price per carat of that color is so high that improving the cut and losing more weight almost never actually improves the value to make up for the weight loss. So typically, when we're going to cut an emerald crystal, once we've taken off any of the matrix, because a lot of times emeralds will have these black spots. It's the mica that grows in association with the emeralds. Once we take off that mica or matrix, whatever it's on there, we're typically going to get something around 30% from the rough crystal. If we have to go loop clean, and the only reason really that anybody's asking for loop clean is when we're talking about watch stones. So for the Swiss cut stones, where a brand like Jacob and Co. or Rolex is demanding, these sort of microscope clean emeralds. So much of the material has to get removed to get rid of all of the inclusions that we're going to be left with a stone that's somewhere between 8 and 15% of the original rough weight. And then if we've got to cut a cab, it's going to be somewhere in the middle of that, somewhere between 18 and 25%. Now, the yield is very much going to be determined on the crystal shape. For me, I've gotten yields up to 60% on rough emeralds because sometimes, and this is really one of the beautiful things about the emerald, sometimes when you get a crystal emerald in for cutting, the rough crystal already looks perfectly like an emerald cut. It's a rectangle with the corners cut off, and you've already got one flat face that can be your table. And all you've got to do is figure out what angles you're going to use for the top and bottom and try to make them match the actual barrel growth shape as much as possible. And the best stone I ever did was 61%. I asked my customer, should I close the window and lose more weight, or should I keep the window and just let it be a bigger stone? And he said, absolutely, keep the window, let it be a bigger stone. And when I finally finished it with the 61%, he was extremely happy. So, in the process of cutting the stone, this is kind of the journey of how it's going to look. So, we're going to start with our rough crystal. We're looking at it for any serious inclusions. And in the case of that one, there was a big crack on the end that had to get cut off. Now, the first step is just going to be a very light preforming. Again, we don't want to lose too much weight on our emeralds, so we don't want to take the risk of hand preforming too much, just enough to get off any major inclusions or cracks, and then to make our general shape. Once we've got our shape in there and we can see that our depth is where we want it to be, we're going to put it into the fastening machine. And in the case of me, I'm using a handpiece like this. So the first step is to start to cut the first main, cut the outline shape and then cut the first main facets. I start with the crown side, so I'm going to cut all those facets, including the girdle and the table, and then I move into polishing. In the case of this video example, I'm using a special lap that doesn't require oil because this is a no oil emerald, so I don't want to incorporate any oil into my cutting process, just in case I might accidentally get some oil in the stone that won't come back out. Now, once the crown's done, I'm going to flip the stone over and cut the pavilion, as you can see here. So usually the emerald's going to be a step cut, whether it's an emerald step cut or, in this case, an octagonal step cut, because that's what made sense for this piece of rough. But typically, the emerald is cut in a step cut. That's a cut that's going to maximize yield as well as maximize color. So whether we're cutting it from the rough or in this example is a recut. So you can see before the recut in the left photo, the emerald looks okay. It's got some very visible cracks. The color is nice, but if you know when we're actually looking this close to the stone, we can see that the outline shape is a little bit wonky. It's not the two sides aren't parallel. We can see that the table looks a little bit twisted, and the two different tiers with the girdle and the table are all kind of at their own different angles. So the whole stone's a little bit crooked. Once I've taken it and recut it, I'm going to straighten out the girdle and then I'm going to straighten out all the other facets up to the table to make sure that whether you're looking at this on your ring or in a loop or in a photo or even in a microscope, everything's going to be parallel all the way through. And in the process, I'm going to improve the color of the stone by improving the angles on the stone, and I'm also going to take the stone to a higher level of polish. But of course, the cost of doing this is weight. As you can see, I lost about 26%, or no, 24% of this stone in order to do this. Some of this, though, had to do with the fact that you can see in the top right-hand corner of the before stone, there's a little bit of an inclusion that was about to break. And on the top left-hand corner, you can see that little black area that's actually a chip. So part of my recut here was to fix a couple chips and also try to, if possible, reduce some of that surface reaching inclusion on the table and on the crown. So I hope you will agree that my recut was worth it. The color is improved, the cutting is improved, and everything just looks a little bit more even. So the emerald, probably more than any other stone, requires really careful attention and a kind of less is more philosophy. We don't want to go too much, we don't want to lose too much, we don't want to cut more than we need to. So let's talk a little bit about the history of emeralds, a bit of the a story of the locality, and just get a sense of where in the world these emeralds have come from and are coming from today. So amazingly enough, emeralds come from almost every continent. Um, we don't think about all of these different localities today, and some of these localities don't exist anymore, but really you can find emeralds almost anywhere in the world. And they all have different qualities, different types of inclusions, different colors, different associated minerals that they grow in, and of course, different stories that come along with different values. So, if we look historically, the ancient emeralds are the Egyptian ones. Really, some of the earliest ones that we know about were being used in Egypt, and then later with the Romans. Some of the earliest emeralds were coming from a mine that was called Cleopatra's Mine. This is as early as 500 BC. And the Romans started using them around 30 BC, possibly learning about them from the emeralds, from the Egyptians. But these Egyptian emeralds weren't very widespread because the source was small. There wasn't a ton of stones coming out, and really, if we can find any existing examples of these Egyptian emeralds, almost all the ones I've ever seen don't really look that nice. A lot of them are very opaque or cloudy, but they are green. So that's one of the rare green stones of the ancient world. You can see in this center picture, this is quite a nice Egyptian emerald, but most of the ones I've ever seen in the museums don't really look like this. It wasn't until the 1520s, whenever the South American emeralds started to come into Europe, that we really sort of see this emerald boom in Europe. We also have this other source of emeralds called Bactrian emeralds. This is an ancient name, Bactrian emeralds, that are thought to have come from somewhere around Afghanistan and Pakistan. And then they would travel to Europe via the Silk Road. And then there were also some European mines in the medieval world coming from Austria, though I would imagine this is a really small source. I've never seen any Austrian emeralds, but only ever read about them. But today, whenever we talk about emeralds, we're really not thinking about Egyptian or Austria, though we still do think about Pakistan and Afghanistan. But I would say probably if we ask people, if we just said the word emerald and ask people what they associate with, we're thinking about Colombian. So um, the Colombian emeralds started to come into Europe during the Renaissance, during the Age of Exploration. And it was really the Portuguese that started to bring these in, and then later the Spanish going into South America. And the famous mines that we know from then and we still know today, the Muzo and the Chivo mines, were some of the first that were discovered. And most of these stones today that are not coming from South America are being cut in India. So the picture on the right is one of my all-time favorite emerald crystal objects. So this is a Renaissance piece, Colombian from 1641. This was, as far as I know, this was cut in the workshop of Rudolph II in Prague. I had the opportunity to see this a couple of years ago, and it's absolutely incredible. It's a vessel that actually opens up. So we've got this amazingly complicated rose cut crown that opens up, and then the carved vessel that I don't know if they were drinking out of it or it was just ornamental, but one way or another, it's pretty cool. Today, when we're talking about emerald mining production, it's really Colombia, Zambia, and Brazil that are providing most of the emeralds that we see in the world today. And all of the rest of those localities that we talked about that still exist only account for 13%. And then when we're talking about cutting, India is really the dominant locality for emerald cutting. There are thousands of emerald cutting or emerald cutters throughout India, especially in Jaipur. But then when we're talking about the facet grade South American emeralds, the Colombian and Brazilian industries both have very powerful, very strong cutting centers of their own. So most of the South American stones are cut on site in cutting houses there. And then all the other cutters of the world outside of India and Colombia are really only accounting for a tiny, tiny percentage. 5%, according to my research, is being cut outside of India and Colombia. So really small numbers. And I guess I'm included in those 5%, not very many. So if we just quickly compare some of these localities to get a sense of like what is the difference between them. You know, Colombia is that famous, very sought after one. And the cool thing about Colombia, besides the fact that the color is very, it's basically the standard. Everything else is compared to Colombia as what makes a good emerald. But the cool thing about the Colombian emeralds is they can be huge. You know, I've seen emeralds, rough emeralds as big as baseballs, as big as softballs. And then, sometimes you see sort of like non-cutting grade mineral specimens that can just be like almost like as big as a small person's arm. Um, Whereas when we start to talk about the Afghan and Pakistan emeralds, the Afghan emeralds can have almost as great, the top color of Afghan, of Panjshir, can really match the Colombian colors, but not in size. All of the Afghan stones are very, very small. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 millimeters long at most. I don't think really any huge stones come out of Panjshir at all, but the colors can be amazing, and the clarities are typically better than almost any of the other localities. The SWAT emeralds from Pakistan are also very small, but they can be a really well saturated color. Really, one of the best colors there is, like some of the old mine colors that Colombia became so famous for. And then Brazil, the other major South American source, a little bit paler than Colombia, though the top colors can be as good. And we can see in this picture, at least, a very clean, beautiful, clear, lovely emerald. When we compare some of the other localities that are, I would say, like second tier colors, Sandawana, this kind of locality that we don't hear about too much more. Slightly neon, slightly fluorescent, sometimes hard to polish due to some of the inclusions that are inside of the stone. The Zambian color or the Zambian locality is one of the most abundant localities today. It's also one of the newest, but the color is a little bit more on the bluer side, even slightly steely blue gray. And then Ethiopia has a little bit more of a yellow green color. It's got a very yellow green on the C-axis, which makes the whole overall face-up color just a little bit more yellow green or straight green compared to some of the other localities. Though there is a small percentage of Ethiopian stones that have a kind of neon-like glow that would almost remind us of something like a Pariba. Pretty rare to find those ones, though. And then when we're talking about the lesser desirable localities, um, these typically have more of a heavy blue component inside. Australia and Nigeria are both very blue. And Australia has this interesting feature, and almost all the Australian emeralds that I've ever seen are banded like this. You can see it's going from this sort of blue-green color with little white stripes and then some really, really big stripes too. So this one on the left is one that I cut, and actually the customer asked me to um, emphasize the banding as much as possible, which was pretty easy because the banding was already in a perfect position to be emphasized. As we look across the A-axis, the striping banding is just perfectly lined up for us to see. So all I did was cut it into a very typical emerald cut, and it gives us a very nice frame for looking at the banding. And then when we're talking about Russian emeralds, these are going to be medium to lighter shades of all three color types. So yellow greens, blue greens, and straight greens, though typically the saturation is going to be lower than other localities, though a small production of it has a pretty deep saturation. So that's just a little overview of what some of these different localities look like and where emeralds come from in the world. So now one of my favorite subjects is talking about the evolution of cutting and trying to get a sense of how the cutting evolved as our technology evolved as cutters. So when we're talking about the oldest stones, whether these be Egyptian, Roman, or whatever, um, all the ancient stones are typically going to be either the raw emerald crystal, like that Egyptian one that we saw in the ring earlier, or it's going to be some kind of a cabochon or sugarloaf. So before the Renaissance, we didn't have the technology to do any type of faceting. So the only thing that we could do before then was a cabochon or just like a flat wafer. So most of the like pre-Renaissance designs, you're going to see them in just cabochons like the ones that we can see here, just following the shape of the stone, making it into a beautiful, outline shape, but we're not getting any of that reflection or flash or brilliance that we might get from a modern faceting pattern. And then if it's not a domed cabochon, then it could also be a sugar loaf. So a sugar loaf is just another type of cabochon. Typically, it's a square shape and it's cut like as if it's a four-sided pyramid. So the four sides are curved like a cabochon, but they all come to a kind of a soft point in the middle, and there's ridges along the edges. So we can see a couple of examples from, this early period of beautiful emeralds centerpiece as a cabochon. This one is with early faceted table cut rubies. We can also see here the 16th century silver ring that has just a barely noticeable sugarloaf emerald. And then once we get into the Renaissance, we're starting to get new technologies coming in to help us cut the stone. So this is where we're first learning about flat facets and the ability to create this mirroring effect into our faceted stones. So the faceting process in the earliest stages looks kind of like this animated guy on the right. He's got a copper wheel set into a table that's on some kind of a spindle. And at first, they're just actually hand spinning the lap just by freehand, but then pretty quickly it turns into a crank that's built into the table as well. So one hand can crank the wheel, and then the other hand is literally just holding the emerald on a stick, cemented on with some kind of tree gum mastic type stuff. And all the faceting is pretty simple and crude. So when we look at these kind of early faceting examples, typically what we see is very imperfect cutting, like this one. You can see the facets are all there. We've got a three-tiered step cut on top and probably a three or four-tiered step cut on the bottom, but all of the facets are very crooked. You can see the table looks like it's slanting over to the right. That first tier facet that's highlighted at the top is not parallel. It looks very crooked. And this is exactly what we would expect. This is what I would expect of myself if I had to cut a stone with just a stick in my hand. Very difficult task. And I think probably this looks pretty good considering the tools that they had at the time. As time goes on and the cutting gets better, we would expect the faceting to get better, the meat points, the polish, the flatness of the facets, and then of the understanding of how the angles should be cut in order to maximize color while also figuring out how not to lose the weight. Now, one of my favorite cuts along the story of the emerald is the briolette. We first see the briolette coming into Europe via the French gem merchant Tavernier. So he's bringing these Indian cut stones into Europe, and they're becoming popular. And the Indian cut of the briolette starts to become a European cut, and we see this pattern kind of coming into fashion at various times, like in the Victorian and Edwardian periods. And then later in the Art Deco period, we see this sort of renaissance of the briolette. Um, Sadly enough, some of my all-time favorite emerald briolettes were in the Louvre a couple months ago and were some of the stones that got stolen. So I got to see this briolette. I took this video like 2 months before the Louvre robbery, and I was seeing these. This is part of the French Crown Jewels collection. I was seeing these in the Louvre, and I was thinking, man, these are so amazing, so beautiful. I would love to actually try to recreate some of these just for my own project. So I was trying to take a video just to try to capture exactly what the faceting pattern looks like. And I'm so glad I did because I'll never well, hopefully these will come back and be found. But as it is today, I may never get a chance to see these up close like this ever again. Unless the Louvre thieves have my phone number, hint, hint. But anyway, that's my record of my favorite all-time briolette emeralds. Really beautiful. So the cool thing about the briolette and the thing that's really unique about it, it's a stone that's cut in the round. So unlike the regular faceted stone or the cabochon that has like a definitive top and bottom, the briolette is meant to be viewed on all sides. So you can see the very intricate triangular pattern that goes up and down the stone, and it's cut all the way around the stone. It could be a perfect circle, or sometimes it's more of like a flat, two-sided back and front. But either way, the stone's cut in the round, which makes the briolette a really different kind of cut than other patterns that we see. Now, when we get into the 18th century, what we see, and this is a big deal in the world of gem cutting history, in the world of diamonds, we see the first proper brilliant cuts being used for diamonds. Now, up until this point, most stones, whether they're emeralds or any other colored stones, have been cut almost exclusively as a step cut. So once the colored stone cutters see this new brilliant cut, and especially the brilliant cut crown, they bring that design concept into the world of colored stones. And you can see in our drawings in the top left-hand corner, we've got different shapes being cut as what we're calling now a mixed cut. So the mixed cut means a brilliant cut crown and a step cut bottom. So this is something that's only done for colored stones, whereas in the diamond, we're doing a brilliant cut on top and bottom. Here they've mixed it with the classic step cut, and we can see a couple of examples here. This early mixed cut pear shape emerald, not a great image, but we can see the crown has brilliant facets, triangular facets. The bottom would be a step cut. And then the other big stone of this piece, the emerald cut in the center, is just a classic step top, step bottom. In these 19th century earrings, we can see how adaptable the mixed cut is. Really the cool thing about the mixed cut is almost any shape can be adapted to use the mixed cut. Here we're seeing cushion shapes, triangular shapes, pear shapes, any other shapes we see. I guess that's just about it. But we could have round shapes, we could have ovals, we could have marquees. Really, today the mixed cut is the most popular of all the designs. And of course, the most famous of all the cuts for emeralds is the emerald cut. Strangely enough, the emerald cut is the last one in our story. For whatever reason, it wasn't until the 1900s, the 18th century, that we start to see the first emerald cuts, this sort of square or rectangular baguette with the corners cut off. But it's really not until the 19th century that we really start seeing it being used all the time regularly in the way that we see today. Almost all emeralds today are cut as sort of rectangular or square emerald cuts, with a small minority being probably something like a pear to follow the shape of the material and probably working around some inclusions. So whether it's a famous one like this big 18 karat, very clean, very green Rockefeller emerald, um, or just your run of the mill emerald, most of the world's stones today are cut as emerald cuts because it follows the shape of the rough. And typically, the shape of the rough is a square or rectangle with the corners broken off or chipped off. So the emerald cut is the perfect stone for maximizing yield because you don't have to change the shape. And then you can follow the angles to somewhat on the top and bottom of the stone to try not to lose too much. So the final few stories I want to tell you guys tonight in our journey of the emerald is just to highlight some of the people that are doing these amazing stones. So in every gem cutting center of the world, there's some master emerald cutter. Any place that cuts emeralds, somebody there is the most well known. And I've had the privilege of meeting a few of them in my travels, so I wanted to share a couple of them with you. Now, I'm coming to you guys from France, and of course, the cutting capital of France is Paris. And the most well-known cutter in Paris, the guy who gets all the big work, and the guy who's really known for cutting not just big emeralds but big everything, is a guy called Manuel Soira. He doesn't like to get his photo taken, and you'll probably never see one because he's very concerned about security. He has a very dangerous job because if people know that he's cutting these big, big stones, he can very easily get robbed on his way home from work. So instead of a photo, I present to you Manuel Soira, the master cutter of Paris in comic book form. Along with some of the emeralds that have been featured in some videos that he's been in, videos for Muzo, videos for Van Cleef and Arpels. And he's really the guy. The last time that I went to visit him, he said, "Do you want to see the stone that we cut this week?" And we said, "Yeah, definitely." He pulls out an 80 carat, no oil, amazing green Colombian emerald. This is huge. I would say, what could I even compare it to? It's not quite as big as a baseball. Let's think maybe the width of a pack of cigarettes or something like that. Huge. I mean, incredible. A stone so big, I don't even want to pick it up for fear of dropping it. He pulls it out, he sets it on the desk, and my wife and I are there just, just ogling it. Like, this is incredible. The doorbell rings, customers showing up. We looked over at the door, we looked back at the desk. The stone has disappeared back into the safe. No one's going to see this stone until it gets back into the customer's hands. But we got the privilege and the luxury, I guess, of getting to see such an incredible stone. Now, my other friend who is a master cutter, I would say this is our master emerald cutter of London. This is Ken Harrington. So Ken Harrington is 79 years old. He was apprenticed at one of the most prestigious colored stone companies in all of England back in the 70s. This is the Chas Matthews Company. And Ken he was in the last generation of people to actually go through a proper old school gem cutting apprenticeship before they kind of stopped doing that. Now, Ken doesn't live in London anymore. He's in Ipswich, which is in the east of England. And he told me that during the lockdown, so Ken lives right next door to his cutting studio. So during the lockdown, even though everybody was locked at home, that meant Ken was actually locked in his studio. And so one of his most important emerald customers came and spent 2 years living in his guest room. Ken told me that he cut over 3,000 stones during 3,000 emeralds specifically during the 2 years of the pandemic lockdown. So Ken, we must say, is the master cutter of emeralds for the UK. And Ken has also showed me some really amazing techniques that I've really never seen anyone do, where he can actually close the surface reaching inclusions that are on the table or the crown of the stone through this polishing technique that he calls fusing the flaws. So he actually does this really unusual thing. You can see in the top right hand corner, I caught him in action. He grabs the spinning lap while he's polishing the stone and stops it. And the abrupt stopping of the friction along with the heat of the stone causes the surface of the stone to glaze over and actually close the surface reaching crack so it's not open to the air anymore. I've really never seen anyone do this. I've been trying to do a research project with him so that we can actually make a scientific paper about what's actually happening when he does this and how is this possible? Because it seems like a miracle, but I've seen him do it a lot, so I can believe it. The final master that we have to talk about, the master of Bogota. So if you read articles or books or see videos about emerald cutting in Bogota, it's more than likely that you're going to see or read a reference to this guy. This is Ricardo Jimenez. He is the master lapidary of Bogota. And as I was saying, you can see in the top right hand corner just how big some of those stones can get. Just a huge emerald, amazing color, and a very wise and experienced gem cutter. So one of the interesting things about all three of these guys, they're all using the same category of faceting machine. So this is the JamPeg. You can see Ken's on the left, the Colombian one on the right, and then the French one in the middle. So all three of these are very different than probably most of the types of cutting that you've seen before. If you've ever seen any sort of hobby person or Western cutter, it doesn't look like this. This is something that's very much a trade skill type machine. Not easy to learn, not something that you really need to have an apprenticeship because it takes years to master this technique. But this is the type of machine that all three of our masters have gone through their apprenticeships, learned how to do, and are now able to use these to make these incredible stones that maximize weight, maximize color, and of course have to maximize the value. So this is our journey for today, and there you can see that beautiful Renaissance vessel with the lid off. So if this journey has interested or excited you guys, you want to go deeper into the world of emerald cutting, we actually have a class on our Fascinating Apprentice website. It's an online course, so if you want to go deep into some of the stuff that I've been talking about and actually see how to cut a stone and cut along with me on video, we've got that. But otherwise, I want to thank you guys for having me. Thank you guys for inviting me. And thanks for your attention tonight. I hope it's been informative and enjoyable. And I'll kick it back over to, I don't know, Clemens or whoever is going to
It's me.
close
I'll
up our
just
evening,
step
or
in
maybe
here,
it's
Justin.
Ray.
So first of all, oh, good Lord, are you kidding me? Um,
You're back.
Give me a second. My provider's been giving me very spotty coverage today, so I'm upset about it. Long and short is, I want to add to your list of cutters. There's a family in Ontario, Canada, called the Wabitos, Ralph and Rudy, and they are actually Canada's master cutters. And they have cut some of the nicest stones that have come through our country anyway. So you can add them if you want to your list of master cutters around the world. And also, I'd like to throw in a quick story for your history for future. I'm sure you know it, but when the country of Iran was under the Shah, he wanted to modernize it, and so he went to the World Bank and said, "Can I get a loan to modernize my country?" And they said, "Well, what do you have as collateral?" And he thought for it, and he said, "Well, we have our crown jewels." He said, "Well, do you have a valuation on this?" He said, "Well, no, not really." So to assuage the curiosity and the necessity of powerful information to back up a loan, he brought in a team from Canada and a few other places, but mostly from Canada, to evaluate the crown jewels of Iran. And they ran into a very, very troubling problem because, as has been for the longest time, emeralds are considered to be a stone that constantly and always has something in it in the way of garden or inclusions. And yet they found stones that fit every single category that would say it's an emerald, but they were flawless. So, with a lot of argumentation worldwide in the gem world, they finally got acceptance that these actually were, and these crown jewels were, they actually had a new category of emerald called flawless emeralds that had somehow made them way over from South America without being damaged, or and made it through the process of growing in nature without getting any inclusions or flaws. So that was really quite a breakthrough in terms of emerald. So that was one of the curious things, and they had to bring in, just out of curiosity, they had to bring in almost everybody that was running the country. Each of the peoples on the council that ran the country at the time had a separate key, and I think it was something like 16 separate keys were necessary to open the vaults of the crown jewels, so they could go in and look at things. And because they had to shut down the country's government to do it, they only were able to look at stones for a few hours every day. And then that meant all these old gentlemen sitting around with their keys in their laps waiting while they assessed stones. So it was actually really, and if you ever have a chance to look up in a library the book called The Crown Jewels of Iran, you will learn a little bit of this. It's really a very interesting, exciting story. Anyway, Justin, thank you so much. It was a nice overview, a nice deep dive into emeralds, and a little bit of understanding of the orientation necessary for color and clarity. And of course, I'm a purist. I don't like windows, so whenever I'm talking to a cutter, I said, please, if you could possibly give me more light, more weight, and no
Yeah.
windows, you're a god.
The constant battle of compromise.
Yeah, it is. It's always a compromise. So people like Clemens and yourself, who are accomplished cutters, are dealing with this on a daily basis. So I'm in awe, and thank you for what you do. I would like to let you know, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all, first of all, for attending and listening to Justin's very interesting program. Um, we will not be open in December because the timing of our usual programming is the last Sunday of the month, and it happens to be right in the Christmas time frame. So we've decided it's much better for everybody that we just don't broadcast. But what I'm going to do in December is I'm going to send everybody a reminder of what's coming up in January. Hopefully by then I'll have the January speaker tied down. But in the meantime, I've got a list of brainstormed ideas of topics that I want to include in the programming over the next year and a half, 2 years. And so what we're looking for, and using the group mind, so please help and ask your friends to help as well when you get this list, because we're looking for presenters who can present these topics. I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're looking forward to so you can think about it as well. First of all, when we've got some of this from Justin today, I look at the power of provenance when you're selling stones. So inside in brackets, location, you can get a difference of 1,000 or 5,000% between one and another gem, depending on where they came from. One that is in the books right now, but we haven't tied down a date, is when and why to use high-end gem lab services. Another one that I really would like to see, I know Elsa, Lisa Elser in British Columbia has actually done this talk on ethical gem buying, and I think it's really important in the day-to-day, especially after all the noise about blood diamonds and so on that's been thrown in our faces over the last few decades. Is that it's important to know that most of the gem mining areas, there's a lot of suffering and difficulties that are experienced by the miners, and not all buyers are ethical in the way they buy gems. They don't always give the guys the real value, a really good value for what they're doing to risk their lives. I also am looking for someone to speak on using fluorescence in gem identification, and a couple of identity location sort of specials: gems of Madagascar, gems of Australia, gems of Brazil. And I want to look at, and this will be those people who deal with used jewelry, because I think it's really important. It's a big part of the estate jewelry, is a big part of our world. And I want to have a title called Recycling Jewelry, a guide to repurposing and selling estate gems in pieces. And I want to have a few more, if I can, tours of gem collections and museums, the so-called Great Gem Collections of the World series or sub-series. And I'm looking for another location one, Unique Gems of Central America. And I want to have one that looks at future gems, ones that aren't necessarily the popular knowledge that know, but ones that may have a future possibility as the tanzanites of our future. So gem futures. I'll look at possible future gems. Guide to the use of gems from old Europe. Excuse me. So there still are gem mining locations in old Europe that are producing, and we're sort of looking at stuff coming out of the Urals and Russia and so on. A guide, okay, a guide to identifying and using synthetic gems. And although and I'm a bit of a purist, a lot of my clients they don't want synthetics, but synthetics are a real part of our world. And so I'm hoping that I get Ari Akavan, who's one of the world's leading experts in synthetic gems, to talk about it for us. I haven't twisted his arm hard enough yet, so we'll work on that. And I also want to I'll have us thinking about what we use to set our stones in. So choosing a metal to use in jewelry is like a review of options that are beyond gold, and educating your clients on how to generate more business via education. And I think this is a matter of RESPECT. You'll get bigger clients and better clients once you are into that market, because if you take care of your clients by making sure they're fully educated on every aspect of the stones that you're trying to sell them, so that they know you are a reliable source. Because a lot of people look upon jewelers, and I'm sorry to say this, as greedy and opportunistic and blah, blah, blah. But if you are the trustworthy jeweler, you're the trustworthy salesperson that's dealing with them, or the trustworthy cutter who knows their stuff, and therefore I can feel confident that I'm giving you the price of a car to buy this stone. Education is extremely important. So those are some of the things I want to throw out to you for the collective mind, to pull together, if we can, a nice group of speakers to excite us and educate us in 2026 and beyond. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we are very lucky to have people like Clemens, who have been providing a great deal of assistance over the past year in helping this program happen. So thank you today, Clemens, for stepping into the fray and getting things going, because quite frankly, sometimes I suffer at the vagaries of technology, and today happened to be the day. So nothing's happening next month, except I'm going to send you a list of topics in the hope that you will, amongst all your vast knowledge and experience, will be able to suggest some good speakers that with some contact information about them, or maybe even contact them yourself and offer this up as a possibility during their year to help educate the world, including yourselves. So thank you for coming. I want to ask, first of all, now, before we go any further, as I've done the promo, but are there any questions that have come out of Justin's presentation today? Even though it was thorough and very well done, there must be somebody somewhere in our audience who has a question
Yeah,
that
I have
Justin
a
can
couple
help
of
us with.
questions here. Before I read the questions out, Justin, you said you have never seen an Austrian emerald. So that's what they look like. Let me show you some better light. You get the
Oh,
idea
cool.
of the size. So the emeralds are rather bright, very included, but they are nice and they're around for a couple hundred years, so they can find them in many crown jewels and so on.
Are
Yeah,
the ones
I
in
know, but
your
nothing like as big
piece
as yours.
cuttable if
Ah,
you if they weren't in there? Or
no.
they're
Yeah,
okay?
maybe you could cut one or two small pieces, but it's not really considered cutting quality.
The color is really nice though. Yeah, I didn't realize they were going to be that good.
Yeah.
Can you still mine them?
Yes, the mine is still active. It's producing a little bit from time to time, and you can also do some rock hounding here in the hills below. So each and every year, after a couple of avalanches, you can find nice green stones in the creeks.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
you can go there with family, with the kids, and collect some emeralds.
That's
That's,
cool.
yeah.
And you can see some of them in the museum in Vienna.
Yeah. So
I'm
for the questions, oh, it shifted. We have one question: where do we first cut the emerald or do we first oil it?
So this is a good question, and I would say it really depends on the stone. Most of the time for us, the stones that we're cutting are already cut, like they're coming in for repairs or recuts. So typically in that situation, what we will do is we will ask the owner to like if it's a dealer, we will ask them to actually remove the oil so that we can see exactly where the inclusions are at. If we just blindly cut the stone while it's oiled, a lot of times we really can't see where the inclusions are. And I've had one situation where I was getting ready to, I planned this entire recut for like a 19 karat emerald that I was going to recut. And, we did all this planning and calculating and how much weight is it going to lose and all this stuff. And the customer's like, okay, yeah, let's do it. And I said, okay, well, you first take the oil out so we can see everything. And as soon as he took the oil out, we could see that there was a huge crack underneath one of the corners, and all the plans that we had made were not going to work because the basically that crack was going to break off if I tried to cut it at all. And so in the end, we couldn't cut the stone because the crack was going to break and lose so much weight. So in the case of the recut, we would really like it to not be oiled, and then we're going to recut it, and then it's going to get re-oiled. In the case of the rough, I think it can be either or. As far as I know, all the rough that I've ever cut is not oiled yet, or it's oiled in the sense that it's maybe been sitting in a bag of baby oil, but not like vacuum oiled. But I think theoretically it could be. I mean, oil could be, incorporated at any stage of the cutting. And I think I think typically the oiling should come either after preforming or after the stone is done. And I think especially today where the no oil emerald has gotten so expensive, I think anybody who's thinking about cutting an emerald would like to see what it looks like before they oil it to make a decision, an educated choice. Here's the cut stone. Should we oil it or not? That's what I imagine everyone is asking. I don't know if anybody else has other experience doing that, but that's what I've seen in my cutting days.
And of course, we have questions from cutters. So, Justin, what angles do you usually use for pavilion and crown?
For crown, I will typically try to use something around a 35 degrees. Or I guess if it's a step cut, maybe the first tier can be 40 and the second tier can be 30 or 20, really depending on the shape of the crystal. The big question usually is, do you put the table on one of the flat faces, which means there's going to be a flat face opposite of the table, which is almost always going to make a window? Or do you put one of the intersections of the crystal faces as your pavilion, which means you're going to flatten one of those to make your table? Um, so you're going to have to decide that. On the pavilion side, all the cutters that I've ever talked to have told me best pavilion angle at the Culet is 42 degrees. So I've always gone with that, and it's always worked well for me. 42 degrees until you hit the window, essentially. If there's a window. For me, there's almost always a window because the customer wants a big stone. So cut it at 42 degrees. That's maximum luster on a barrel. And then whatever's left after that, whatever you can't close, just make arbitrary angles like 20 degrees or whatever you have to just make a keel line. I have asked customers before, do you want me to just keep the bottom flat because it's the face that's opposite the table? And I said, we'll keep more weight if we keep it flat because I'm just not going to cut it at all. And every time the customers have been like, no, it's weird like that. Put some angle just so it's a line. But yeah, we try to, if it's 42 and it's a three-step cut, then maybe it's something like 42, 47, 57 or something like that. Or maybe 60, 50, 42 or something around there. But yeah, we try to end around 42 degrees. Gives us a nice tilt, it gives you some room to tilt the stone before it starts windowing right away. Because barrel's a low RI stone, so it needs deeper angles than others.
Okay, so that was the questions that I have seen here. Anybody else? Some questions?
Yes, hi. I have a question from Toronto. First of all, thank you, Justin. Wonderful presentation. You do such interesting work, and you express it so beautifully. I was just curious, those wonderful pictures about the crown jewels. What do you think's happened to them, and do you think they've been cut already?
I r- I mean, obviously, all I can do is guess. I would hope that they're in someone's secret safe intact. And the reason, well, obviously, the reason I hope that is because I don't want them to be cut. But I also think, some of the stuff that they stole wasn't gold. It wasn't a huge gold thing. A lot of it, some of it was silver. Of course, the gems are expensive, but the value of the thing is in the provenance, not the material cost. I mean, yeah, those big emeralds are going to be expensive, but the the crown jewels itself, that's like a priceless object, whether you can move it. Of course, you can't move the crown jewels on a public market, so
Yeah,
it's going to have to be in the black market. A lot of people have speculated that there was already a buyer. I hope that was the case. I hope that in like 100 or 200 years, they come out of hiding and they're intact and they can go back or whatever. Whatever. They're not like destroyed and lost forever. Because what a shame if they get recut just for the sake of some money. Like, who
yeah,
cares?
you're
That'd
right.
be
Thank you.
terrible.
Yeah, thanks.
And we've recently seen that things do show up after 100 years.
Yeah, that
Diamond.
Yeah, what was that? I saw that too. It just like it was been in someone's storage, like some diamonds, some sort of like famous diamonds that they thought had been lost were just in like a bank vault for 100 years. So cool. Like that gives you hope.
Yeah,
Part of the Austrian crown jewels owned by the Habsburg family, and they
Yeah,
transported it to Canada. So they were never lost, they were just
I've
misplaced.
heard some
yeah.
rumblings that people are looking at using a cyanocrylate like liquid glue to fill the cracks with a colored glue that would be, pardon me. I wonder if anybody's heard of anybody using a cyanocrylate rather than oil, the colored cyanocrylate to heal emerald cracks.
I
Uh,
haven't heard about it as a glue. I've definitely heard about permanent resins, and so
Oh,
those
that's the same
permanent,
thing.
yeah, permanent resins can be dyed. Yeah,
Yeah,
dyed opticon, or also dyed oil. I mean, that's one of the things that people have to look for when they're doing their reports is like, is it oiled? Is it opticon? Is it dyed? Because if it's dyed, that's totally changes, the understanding of value because then you really don't know what the color is. But yeah, definitely that is something that happens. Hopefully not something that happens a lot, and probably something that only happens on really low grade stones to make them saleable. I think anyone who has any stone of value would not mess around with adding dye to it because then you're potentially ruining your sale, but you never know. People do crazy stuff.
and from my point as a chemist, cyanoacrylate doesn't really make sense because it hardens so fast. It doesn't have the time to penetrate into the cracks because you have to soak the emerald into your resin. Then you have to apply vacuum to get rid of the air that's in the cracks. Then you apply pressure or temperature. So this process takes, yeah, I would say at least an hour, sometimes even longer, some days. That doesn't make sense with cyanoacrylate.
the UV activated ones, Clemens, that don't cure until you hit them with UV.
Yeah, but then it's not cyanoacrylate.
Okay, good.
Cyanoacrylate reacts with the moisture of your fingers, for example, extremely well with your
Yeah,
fingers or with your eyes.
yeah.
Uh, that might be some different materials, acrylates in general, but what people mostly use is epoxy resins. And these epoxy resins, like Opticon, you can use with or without a hardener. And this is an extreme difference for the lab because if you use it without a hardener, it can be removed again. If you use it with a hardener, it's a permanent modification of the stone and then it gets a lower grading.
Yep. Okay, so I'd like to wish happy Hanukkah, happy Christmas. greetings of the season to come that we won't be talking to you and having a show during, but please remember to tune back in when you're invited to come and join us in January. And if you liked what you saw tonight, talk to your gem friends and get them involved so we can have a bigger and better audience each and every time we program when we have someone of the quality of Justin giving us a presentation, or Clemens, and other people we've had the honor of hearing. So thank you all so much for giving us your time and your interest. And thank you, Justin, for your presentation. It was well done, which I had to expect because of your reputation.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And we'll look forward to seeing you all again at the end of January. And whoever's going to Tucson, I'm hoping to see you there too.
I'll be there at the 22nd Street show, so come say hi. We've got a new book, as Clemens was showing off earlier, and I'll be happy
And
to
just
show
by
you
the
guys
by, I'm
around.
looking for a place to stay. So if anybody's got a spare room, let me know.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks for having me. Happy everything to everybody, and see you guys later.
See you around.
Yep.
Goodbye, everybody.